The Japanese used to consider themselves the supreme race of Asia. They aimed to conquer the entire eastern half of the continent, and they didn't surrender until they got nuked. Twice. They were samurai. Being an island nation, Japan has a long history of war among its own people. Its participation in world history is relatively short in comparison. For hundreds, if not thousands of years, Japanese men lived to fight and die with glory on the battlefield. They trained for decades, dedicating their lives to the sword, dueling their way up the ranks. They trudged through mountains and jungles. They burned down castles. They murdered the children of enemy clans in cold blood. They cut open their own stomachs in order to restore honor to their name. They suicide-bombed planes into American ships in kamikaze attacks as a last resort to save their country. Love them or hate them, there's one thing we can all agree on. For most of their history, the Japanese were some of the toughest warriors on the planet with the most fearsome, undying spirit. So, what happened? If you've been to Japan recently, you may have noticed the fact that every goddamn product, building, store, company, and even city has its own kawaii mascot character. If you've checked out Japanese music, you've probably seen the idol groups, massive troops of girls hand-picked for their soulless, calculated plastic surgery cuteness, singing mind-numbing drivel pumped out of a corporate kawaii factory. If you've watched anime, you may have noticed the sheer volume of series catering towards this kawaii, childlike aesthetic. You may have also noticed that the fan bases for these shows are comprised mostly of grown-ass men. Imagine bronies, but instead of liking ponies, they like 12-year-old girls. And instead of being a niche subculture shunned by the majority of society, it's mainstream, and you can buy merch at 7-Eleven. It didn't used to be like this though. Japan in the 1940s looks a lot like America or Europe. Hardworking men, stay-at-home wives. Hearty food, overcoats and fedoras. Pork pie hats. How did we go from this to this? From this to this? From this to this? How did the samurai become fat nerds with sus preferences in fictional females? It starts with losing World War II. After the Japanese surrendered, the Americans moved in and occupied the country for 7 years, bringing with them burgers, ice cream floats, and milk. Yes, milk. It was during the occupation that they began serving milk to children every day with their school lunch, which is still standard nationwide, and pretty insane considering that Japan has no history of milk consumption at all, and consequently, to this day, 90% of Japanese people are lactose intolerant. And what was school lunch like prior to the occupation? Whale meat.
The meat just looks so cool. It's so different from any other meat. Look how dark that is.
They were eating whale meat. So they went from eating wild-caught, natural red meat filled with all the vitamins, minerals, and amino acids a growing boy needs to become a samurai, to drinking grain-fed, pasteurized, and homogenized estrogenic cow milk that their stomachs are not equipped to digest. And tofu. Can't forget tofu. Blech. And so began the emasculation of the Japanese people. Since the war, Japan has not been allowed to keep an offensive military. The military is a relatively small self-defense force that spends most of its time, building snow sculptures in Hokkaido. Contrast this with South Korea's compulsory military service, and you can see how over the generations they've stayed relatively tough and masculine, while Japanese men have gotten softer and softer, more and more feminine. It's no coincidence that Korean men are becoming increasingly popular among Japanese girls. And that's what Japan is today. and effeminate society. And what do females like? Cute shit. And what do Japanese men like? Cute shit. Everyone in this country loves these cute little kawaii characters and chibi anime girls. Brightly colored hair, tapioca drinks and parfaits, pudding, cake, cream puffs. Japanese men spend more time in the hair salon than the gym, the park, the beach. They don't go outside. They get perms. They play smartphone gacha games, gambling to collect their favorite kawaii 2D anime girls. They drink 3% ABV peach-flavored chu-hais. They're shy and unconfrontational, small and docile. They shop for clothes in the ladies section. Upwards of 30% of young Japanese men are using makeup now. Makeup. And apparently they start as young as middle school. They start putting on concealer and foundation and getting their eyebrows trimmed, lipstick. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being a high school student as a guy, putting on makeup in the morning? That thought would not even have crossed my mind. And you know what? I would have never put tofu in my mouth either. And that's how kawaii culture was born. Kawaii took over Japan because everybody's a little girl, and there's no real pressure to change. During times of war, men have to step up to the plate to serve their nation. During times of peace, they can avoid contact with real women, play an erotic dating simulator, and masturbate into a pocket pussy that they picked up at the convenience store for 500 yen, and nobody really has anything to say about that. Except me, so subscribe to the channel for more.